Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today our guest is Stephen Goodman. He is the president and CEO of SHG Planning. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. It's great to be on.
Thank you. So tell us some about yourself. And I mean, you're into business succession planning and trust and helping families be able to carry on a bit, the family business from generation to generation. What made you get into that?
It's a good question. I'll start with my background. I started out in public accounting. I worked for one of the big four accounting firms, KPMG. I'm a CPA. I have my MBA in finance. I then worked for JP Morgan for 3 years in their private bank. Kind of decided I wanted to be in my own business. I went to a good business school, but I kind of saw when I was at JP Morgan that the people that really advanced were generally the ones who went to the top, 8 or 10 business schools, which I didn't go to one of them. And I said, the only way I'm going to control my destiny is to go out on my own. When I was with JP Morgan, banking world was changing. So they were starting to get involved in estate planning and insurance and business planning and investment planning. And I just got very interested in all those subjects. So I decided I would kind of go out on my own into what I guess you would call the financial planning world. My business is a little different. I'm not a full-blown financial planner in that my focus is mostly in business succession planning, which is dealing with business owners with the succession either to their families, other partners, key employees. I do a lot of work in estate planning. I also get involved in sophisticated design of people's retirement plans. If they're going to get involved in things like ESOPs, I could help advise them, and as well as a lot of work in risk management, whether it be life insurance, disability, long-term care, and investment planning. Those are kind of the areas I kind of focus in on.
So what made you decide that, okay, I'm kind of done working for everybody else. I want to go out and do this on my own?
Well, like I said, I mean, I just saw that to advance in a big company, a lot is not within your control. And I just said, I want to be able to control my own destiny. And if I leave and I go out on my own, which certainly had risks relating to it, going from getting a nice salary to going on your own and having no clients, I said, at least I can control my own destiny, which thankfully turned out to work out very, very well with me. And that's kind of why I did it.
Kind of, what was the point that made you feel that you have become successful at what you're doing? When was that particular moment?
It's a good question. You always want to be more successful, so you never want to rest on your laurels. But I don't know. I mean, I probably 3 or 4 years into doing this, when we used to do a lot of seminars back then. A lot of them face-to-face seminars. And we used to do it with a lot of the big banks, Citibank, JP Morgan, Chemical Bank was a bank back then. A lot of these banks have kind of merged since then. I would speak in front of audiences of 50, 60, 80, 100 people. I really understood what I was talking about, and the people were very impressed with what I had to say, and they wanted to work with me and my firm. So, that's when you get reinforced, when you have a bunch of people that are wealthy, successful people who say, this person really hit a lot of nerves, and he's the one I want to add to my team to help me. And obviously with that became more financial success, because as you get more clients, you make more money. But it was first just that feeling of, I know my stuff and people realize it. And that's probably where I kind of sensed it.
So obviously you help businesses and things, in families and so forth. who is it that typically is your client? Is it the family, or is it more, the CPAs like me and financial planners that reach out to you to bring you in?
Well, it's an interesting question, because whenever I'm referred into a business owner by somebody, let's say somebody like yourself, I always view that you are my client, because you're the one who's recommending me, and the client is your client. Now, obviously, they're kind of my client as well, because I'm helping them in these areas. When I meet a client through, let's say, another client, where I'm not brought in by, a center of influence, well, then clearly they're my client. But I don't treat the client any differently, whether I meet them on my own or whether you introduce me. It's just, I understand kind of where it came from, and I respect the people that introduced me, and always want them to know that I look to them. If the client has a need, like if I'm speaking to a client and I think they need something and you brought me in, I'm not going to just recommend somebody to the client. I'm going to come back to you and say, look, I think the client needs help in this area. Here's some people that I work with. Would you be open to using them? If not, do you have somebody? And then if you have your own person, great, we work with them. Or if you're not, you may be open to using somebody that I work with.
Yeah, that's great. Because one of the big things, you're talking right now is the team approach. And I'm very much the team approach. Recently written a book, build the right team, build the right plan. And that's really what you're doing, is you have your team and helping the individuals build their plan. So that's always great. So what are some of the significant obstacles that people run into with business succession planning?
I mentioned this, when I speak to people, there's two big issues, without getting into the nitty-gritty specifics, which I will, but the two macro issues as to why people don't plan. One is time. Entrepreneurs have gotten successful because they're very focused on their business. They're on their game every day. Every day there's issues in their business. No business owner doesn't run into something every day. There's some problem. To do planning requires you to take a step back from what you need to do today to work on things that are for the betterment in the future. And although that sounds great, most entrepreneurs are not good at that, because they don't want to take their time away from the needs they have today in their business. So the first reason I find people don't do planning is they just don't allocate the time. And the time is not just one meeting. To do proper planning is usually a 6-month process that has, minimum a meeting a month with phone calls in between. And there's a time commitment, and every meeting requires decisions to be made. So it's not like the business owner just shows up and says, okay, I'm here for the next meeting. They usually have to have thought about things, and that takes time. So that's the first big issue. The second big issue is more a family issue. So let's focus this more on a family business.
Right.
So the example I always give is, I have 2 kids, they're not in my business, but I have 2 kids, and they're, in their 30s. And, from the time they were babies, like, oh, well, you got him a lollipop, I want a lollipop. This one got to go to the movies, I want to go to the movies. You bought this one a cell phone, the other one wants a cell phone. This one gets a bicycle, the other one gets a bicycle. And constantly, they play you against one another, and you keep reinforcing to your kids, which is the truth, that you love them the same, whether you have 2 kids, 3 kids, 5 kids, I love you all the same, because you do generally love all your kids the same as a parent. And then all of a sudden, one day you wake up and you say, something, I got a problem here. I built this really big business. I got 3 kids. One of them's in the business, 2 are not. And obviously I can go into different scenarios and the different problems, but let's stay with this one. Most of my money is in my business. When I die, put aside husband and wife for a second, more second death as an example.
Right.
Like, am I leaving this business to all 3 of my kids? Am I leaving it just to my kid in the business? If I leave it to my kid in the business, I don't have a lot to give my other kids. If I leave the business to all of my kids, then I'm taking 2 kids who know nothing about the business, and then how much say am I giving them? How much am I protecting my son or daughter in the business versus the other kids? So what ends up happening is the parent, more so dad, because still in the 60, 70 age group, which is where a lot of people are doing this, businesses still today are mostly run by men. It's certainly changing. If I had this conversation 20 years from now, it would not be that way. But today, that's generally how it is. And dad sits there and goes, I got two sons and a daughter. I don't get along that well with one of my daughter-in-laws. As it is, it's tough. Like, if I tell my kids my plan, I know somebody's not going to be happy because it's never going to be perfect. And if it's one of my sons that aren't happy, that means my daughter-in-laws are going to be even more unhappy. And I don't want them holding my grandkids as ransom against me. Like, if you do something and piss off your son and that really pisses off your daughter-in-law, and your daughter-in-law says, your dad is a jerk. And like, I cannot believe that he actually thinks that this is a fair way for him to do things. And you know what? Hell with him. I have no interest to have a relationship with your father. And, I'm not having the grandkids see your dad and mom anymore, So a lot of times parents understand that, like, I am taking a risk in the relationships within my family, the more I expose my plan and my idea. So it's almost like if I do nothing and I shut up, everybody will be fine. And then when I'm dead, they'll probably want to kill each other, but I'm dead. So there's nothing I could do about it at that point. I mean, it's a selfish way of thinking, but so those are the two big issues: the unwillingness to take the time to plan, and that making these decisions is very emotionally difficult. It's not like if I have $5 million, $6 million in money and it's in municipal bonds and I say, okay, when I die, I got 3 kids, I'm going to each kid $2 million of bonds. It's like, who's going to argue about that?
Right.
You got 3 kids, you're giving them all of the bonds, but when you have a business, it's much, much more complicated. So that's big picture, Gary, the problems that happen. We can get into like some more very specific situations.
Yeah, because actually you bring up a good topic there, because you talked about, okay, the daughter-in-law and things like that. How do you go about with the succession planning or trust planning, estate planning, in the fact of protecting your child? Because typically, okay, somebody goes through a divorce and suddenly their spouse gets half of all their stuff. How are you able to protect your child against that so everything doesn't get split in half again?
Well, look, there's really 2 approaches you could take. There's the hard approach and the easier approach. The hard approach is to tell your kids before they get married they need some sort of a prenup.
Right.
Especially difficult, not as difficult. I know this is going to sound a little chauvinistic and I don't mean it to be that way, but it's just what I've experienced. A little easier for a daughter to ask their husband, if a daughter's coming from the wealth, to ask the husband to sign a prenup. When the sons have to ask the daughter-in-laws for the prenups, because they're coming not from as much money, generally leads to a lot of friction and usually starts animosity towards mom and dad from the daughter-in-law almost before the marriage even starts. It's like that's step 1 already in issues, okay? And the daughter-in-law is not going to forget that, and that's going to cause problems going forward. So that's one way of doing it. The second way of doing it is to make sure that anything that is given or bequeathed to your kids is done in trust. You just can't give things outright. Now, yes, every state's different. Every state has different divorce laws. Generally, if you give somebody something, that's considered their assets, but it's so easy to commingle assets or have the assets grow. And then if there's a divorce, what piece of that is the spouse entitled to get? So the best way to do it is put it into trust. So like examples, like I'll give you a few examples. Like if, let's say your kid's going to buy a house and they want to buy a house. So what you end up doing is you could either say, if I'm going to give a down payment towards the house, I'm going to buy the house in a trust. So I'm paying for it, it's in a trust, which means if there's ever a divorce, the spouse has no rights to anything because the house is owned by a trust that's for my family and protected. Or what you could do is say, okay, you go buy a house and I'm going to lend you the down payment. I'm not going to give you the down payment. I'm going to lend you the down payment. And now you theoretically have a house that has no equity because you have a $600,000 house with a $150,000 loan from me and a $450,000 loan from the bank. Now, yes, if the house goes up in value, the two of you share in that appreciation, but the bank's getting back their money and I'm getting back my money if there's ever an issue, because if you guys get divorced and we sell the house, then I got to get back my money. So, there's clearly things that you could do with business, putting things in trust. The biggest problem, Gary, when you do it is that trusts are great. Look, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't make money by somebody putting something in trust, but both personally, my own planning and my advice to people, I am a big, big, big believer in trust. Because you just can't predict things. And it gives you so much, not only tax protection, but protection against lawsuits, divorces, and things like that. The biggest problem with the trust is the trustee. Who's the trustee?
Right.
And am I gonna, if I put something in trust and I have to my kids, I don't want it to just be that kid to be a trustee. I want protection there. That's the whole idea. So I want to have somebody else. So do I pick their sibling? And now I could have siblings fighting with each other because they're co-trustees on trust and they're fighting over how they're treating each other. Do I pick you as the CPA? So I have an outsider, who's independent as a trustee. But the problem is what happens if something happens to you? There isn't necessarily somebody at your firm that I'm going to trust to do it. So
Sure.
Who's the backup? And who's the backup there? And if it's for grandchildren and money's going to be in trust for 60, 70, 80 years, how do I know who to pick as a trustee? So then do I go to a financial institution and pick Wilmington Trust or Bessemer or JP Morgan or somebody as a trustee? The benefit there is theoretically they go on forever. They could be bought out and then you acquire them, but it's impersonal and they charge high fees and, maybe they're not going to really do what I want to be done for my kids. So that's the catch-22. The more tying up of things to protect for these things, the more other complications that come into play. But the benefit is that, you're not just leaving something to your son or daughter and you're dead and they could get divorced 10 years later and all of a sudden the money's going to them and you don't want that to be what happens.
Yeah, I hear cases all the time because people aren't doing the proper planning and doing these things, and that's what ends up happening. Or even worse, people aren't going through and updating things. I had someone pass away last year, and they never updated their beneficiaries on their retirement plan, and their mom had already passed away, and that's who they were leaving it to. So, dad was still alive, but everything went to the estate. And I know that's not what they planned on, but again, goes back to, making sure that you do the planning that you need to do to be able to keep things straight. What are some of the other issues that you run into when you're dealing with trust or you're coming in after the fact and somebody says, "Oh, I have a trust already set up"? What are some of the issues that you're seeing?
Well, I'm going to divert a little bit and then I'll get to that.
Sure.
Like, to me, because you brought up the point earlier, to me, two of the other problem areas that why people don't do proper planning is because the business owner bifurcates their advisors because they like to stay in control and they don't want to put all their advisors together because all of the advisors together tell him to do something that he doesn't want to do. It's very hard for him to say no, while he could, if you're the one guy who says it and you're a CPA, you know that you want to keep getting paid every month to do his work. Sometimes you just got to eat crow. And like, even though you want him to do something, you just say, well, I'm not going to push the guy because I don't want the guy to fire me. So right. That's one problem. The second problem is when egos come into play, because there's usually one advisor, generally the CPA, sometimes the tax attorney is the key person. Sometimes that person's ego hurts the planning process. And basically, they don't really want to be a team player. So generally, like I have a couple of things that I bring to the table. The first thing is that I have a multidisciplinary background. So there's almost nothing the CPA, the attorney, the investment person, the insurance person, the pension person is going to speak about that I don't understand almost everything that they're talking about. And that's unusual because everybody on the team knows their stuff and they know a little bit about the other people's, but they're not experts. I have the expertise in all of these areas, so it makes me very well-rounded, which is really important. The second thing is my purpose is to do the planning. I don't have an ongoing responsibility like the CPA or the lawyer does. So it's like if I don't get the person to do it, I don't really serve a purpose. So like, you know, my job is to push the process forward, because if he doesn't do it, then he might as well just get rid of me because I'm not really serving any other purpose. So, you know, those things are important. A couple of things that, being a little bit more granular and specific, but to give the audience what I find are some of the big issues that come into play in planning. So let's go through a couple of scenarios. Scenario number one, I got a kid in the business, I got a kid not in the business, all right? Most of my assets are in the business. How do I figure out what I do for my child who's not in the business? So there's really only a handful of options. The options are A, I give everything 50-50 to my kids. And now put aside estate taxes for a minute. I have an active and a non-active child, 50-50 owners in a business. If I leave it 50-50, then I've handcuffed my child in the business because now they can't make any decisions on their own and they have to go to a sibling who's not involved in the business. If I give the voting shares to the child in the business, even though the shares are left 50-50, then I need to put in place all of these protection, because the main asset I'm leaving my other child is a non-voting interest in a closely held business that they can't make any decisions. So what prevents my son or daughter from raising their salary, taking perks, doing things, and in essence, not giving anything to the other child? And maybe even if they sell the business, they structure it where a lot of the money is an earnout or some kind of consulting agreement. So a lot of the money comes to the active child to the detriment of the non-active child. So if you're going to do planning and give voting rights to the child in the business, you need to structure a lot of protection in there so that the active child can run the business, make the decisions about the business, but can't just, part of my French, screw the other child. Okay. Right. If you decide I'm going to leave the business 50-50, but then there's going to be a mandatory buyout by the active child of the non-active child's interest, then the problem you run into is the active child wants the value to be as low as possible. The non-active child wants it to be as high as possible. If the business is big enough that could cause estate taxes, now the non-active child is like on the side of the IRS fighting for a higher value, which could lead to more taxes. Right. So they're in conflict with each other. Okay. If the other choice is I try to find other assets to leave my other child, but maybe there isn't enough assets. So many times what people do is they buy life insurance and they say, I'm going to buy $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, $10 million policy in trust for my child who's not involved in the business. And that's going to be the way to take care of them. But then the active child's going to say, well, wait a minute, you're leaving him money. He's got no risk. I'm being left a business that has risk. So right. It's like, you're never going to satisfy them. So that's an example if you have it that way. Now, let's say I have 3 kids. And let's say I have 1 kid in the business, 2 kids not in the business. Well, now it makes it even harder, because now if I want to leave everything equal, I can have my non-active kids own 2/3 of the business, while the active kid only owns 1/3. And now I need more assets to make it fair, because now I got 2 kids I got to give things to if I'm not going to give them the business. What happens? I'll give you another scenario. I got 2 kids. You're one of my kids and your brother's a kid, okay? And you're both in my business. You came into the business 15 years ago. Your brother, my son, came in 8 years ago. You're really the heir apparent to the business. You're more knowledgeable. You have more responsibility. You're getting paid $300,000-$400,000 a year. My other son's getting paid $150,000 a year. So now I'm doing planning. I decide I'm going to leave the business 50-50 to my 2 boys or to my son and daughter who are in the business. That seems fair. We're both in the business. How long is it going to take for your brother to knock on the door and say, yeah, with all due respect, you get paid $300,000 a year, I get paid $150,000 a year, but we're now 50-50 owners in this business. you're not getting paid more than me anymore. And you know what?
Right.
All those decisions and how you've treated me as like, your little brother, well, now we're equal and every decision requires both of us to do it. And now you're sitting there going, I can't believe dad or mom did this because my brother doesn't have half of my knowledge. Okay, but what happens if I don't do it that way and I give you control? Okay, well then how do I protect your brother so you don't take advantage of him? You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
like every one of these things causes a problem. I'll give you another scenario because this is good because people, when they hear this, they can
Oh,
say,
yeah.
wow, that's me. I have that exact issue. Here's a perfect one. You and I are 50-50 owners in a business. We're both in our 60s. We started the business when we were in our 30s, and we have a buy-sell agreement that says if one of us dies, we buy each other out. And make it simple, we have a $10 million business. You have $5 million of insurance on me. I have $5 million of insurance on you. Either of us dies, we buy each other out. Okay, sounds reasonable. You and I have our 2 kids. One of my kids want to come into business. I talk to her, I say, well, Gary, you have a kid coming in, I have a kid coming in, we have a buy-sell agreement. If either of us die, that kid's out. I don't want to be partners with your son or daughter, and I don't really want to be partners with your son or daughter. So it's almost like I have to tell my child, look, understand something. You're 30 years old. You want to come in this business. You're going to start investing some of the most critical years of your life in this business. I have an agreement with Gary, my partner. If I die first, he buys my shares. I don't own anything, which means you're not going to get anything because he's going to have to take care of his own kid. He's not going to give you shares. I mean, maybe if you've been in the business 10 years and he thinks you're a superstar, maybe things will change, but the odds are you're done. So like, how can I even ask you to come into this business and invest some of the best years of your life based on that? Because it's potluck, it's 50-50. I don't know. Maybe 10 years from now, Gary and I will sit down and we'll be 10 years older and you guys will be 10 years older and we'll be more willing to set up a plan. But today we're not going to do that. And I could die tomorrow. So it's like, those are like critical kind of conversations people have to have. And that example that I just gave you is not an uncommon example.
Oh, no, not at all.
Many people that are 50-50 owners of businesses that now their kids are coming into the business. And if they're not willing to talk that out, your child could be investing some of the best years of their life in a business that they'll never own.
Right. You've really hit on a lot of good points, and I'm sure that the listeners are it's like, whoa, wait a second, that's me, that's my brother, that's whoever. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, that's listening, besides going through me, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I'll give you a couple of different things. I wrote a book on business succession planning. If they go to stephengoodman.biz, they can download a free copy of the book, which I think they would find very interesting. It was written more for the business owner than necessarily a CPA or an attorney. There's some little complicated parts of it, but most of it is like the kind of things we've been talking about. They could also go to my website, which is shgplanning.com. I've written about 70 articles that are on my site, plus some podcasts and videos that I've done. My email address is sgoodman@shgplanning.com. And, especially with COVID, best way to get me is my cell, which is 516-297-7390.
So, Stephen, I really appreciate your time. A lot of wisdom that you've hit on today that I think the listeners are really going to be able to use. So thank you for joining us. All right, thanks.
This show has been produced by Market Domination, LLC. To discover how you can have your own show completely done for you and turn it into a real published book and become the authority in your marketplace, go to www.marketdominationllc.com/podcast offer.